Hi, my name is Emma Myers. I'm a volunteer navigator at Reef Asylum Support, and this video is going to go through how to begin preparing your temporary protected status, your TPS application. In early March, the US government announced that it was extending temporary protected status, TPS, to Ukrainians who've been in the US since March 1st and to Afghans who've been in the US since March 15th. But as of early April, as of the recording of this video, we are still waiting for USCIS to release the application for Ukrainians and Afghans to begin applying for TPS. So whereas the government has already announced that they're going to extend TPS to citizens from these two countries, they have not released the application for you to start applying yet. Once the application is released, you're going to have a period of several months to prepare your application. And I include that so that you're aware as you're waiting to be able to apply, you're aware that it's not that the application is going to be released and suddenly you're going to have to put everything together very quickly and send it in. You will have a period of several months. However, there is a benefit to submitting your application earlier on in the application period, because then you're at the front of the queue of people who have applied. Your application may be processed more quickly than others. So there's a benefit to beginning to prepare right now, even as you wait for the official application to be available. A reminder here, you have to apply for TPS. The government has said we are extending TPS to citizens of Ukraine and to Afghanistan. However, this isn't an automatic status. You're not just going to receive it. You're going to have to apply to receive it. Having said all that background, this is the question. You're eligible for TPS. The application date for your country hasn't been released yet. You can't submit your application yet. What can you do in the meantime? And the answer is prepare. There's a lot you can do ahead of time to begin pulling together the pieces of your application. We're going to go through that in this video. A TPS application is made up of a combination of required forms and optional forms, as well as supporting documents that accompany each of those forms. Each individual person's TPS application is going to look a little different because it's going to have a different combination of these required and optional forms. This page is going to go through required forms and payment. The form I-821 is the kind of base application for TPS. This is the form you're going to fill out that has you applying for temporary protected status. Please note that throughout this presentation, whenever you see words that are in orange, this is the official name of a form. And if you just take these words and put them into Google, it's going to pull that form up for you as a PDF so that you can reference it. Anything in orange, if you Google it, that's going to pull the form up for you. So form I-821 is the application for TPS. Along with form I-821, you're going to have to provide a series of supporting documents. We'll talk about those supporting documents later in the video. Along with the form, the supporting documents, you're also going to have to provide payment. Payment for a TPS application ranges from $50 to $545, depending on your age and which additional things you're doing along with your application. So if you apply for a work permit, for example, it's going to make your application more costly. You can check the exact cost for your application depending on your age and whether you're applying for a work permit at the link listed here. The costs have changed in the past. There's usually an announcement that accompanies a change, but it's always better to just right before you submit your application, double check that the cost you're attaching, the payment you're attaching to your application matches the cost for the type of application you're submitting. There are 3 ways to submit payment for a TPS application. The first is Form G1450. This is an authorization for a credit card transaction. So you're going to put in your credit card information, the amount that you're authorizing be charged to your credit card, and you're going to send that form in to USCIS. Alternatively, you can also attach a certified check or a money order. And there are details in the payment At this link, there are details about what information needs to be on a certified check. Or finally, if the cost of a TPS application is burdensome for you, you may be able to request a fee waiver. And I'll talk about that on a next slide as well. One final thing to note as we think about this, the kind of foundation of your TPS application, this required form I-821, is that everyone needs to submit their own application. For some other immigration applications, there is a principal applicant, the main applicant, and then members of their family are included in their application. This is not how TPS works. For TPS, each individual person applying for TPS needs to complete their own form I-821. So thinking about the decision to submit a request for a fee waiver. In order to request a fee waiver, you have to meet at least one of the 3 criteria listed here. The first is that you are 150% below the federal poverty guideline. This is a specific number. It depends on where you live and how many people are in your household. The link listed here allows you to look up what that number is for your place of residence and for the number of people in your household. And then you will demonstrate by providing bank statements, pay stubs, things of that nature, that you are earning below this number. The next criteria is that you are experiencing financial hardship. This could mean that you lost your job unexpectedly, that you're experiencing unforeseen medical expenses, that you do not have access to financial resources that were in the past available to you. Note that this is the most vague category, and that you're going to have to define what financial hardship means in your case, and you're going to have to provide the documentation to back that up. So you can't just say, I'm having a hard time financially. You're going to have to say that this event, losing my job, illness, an accident, means that I have incurred expenses and I cannot afford to pay the fee for this application as a result of those expenses. And you're going to have to provide documents to show each of those pieces of the explanation. The third criteria is that you're already receiving a benefit from the US government based on your income level. And you'll show this by just providing proof that you're receiving that benefit. These are the 3 criteria you have to meet. You have to meet at least one of them. But something to be aware of is that even if you meet one or more of these requirements, USCIS still has the discretion to decide whether or not to grant you a fee waiver. So you're not guaranteed to receive a fee waiver, even if you meet one of these requirements, or one of these 3 criteria. When you are submitting your TPS application, if you are requesting a fee waiver, you're going to have your whole application prepared. You'll have your request for a fee waiver at the front of your application, and you're going to send that into USCIS without payment attached. You're just going to include the request. USCIS will receive that request. They'll evaluate whether to grant you a fee waiver or not. If they do grant you a fee waiver, then they'll just begin processing your application. However, if they deny you a fee waiver, they're going to take your application and they're going to mail it back to you. You'll receive it in the mail. You'll have to reattach a form of payment, and then you will return the application to them. So the process of requesting a fee waiver, if you are denied, can slow down the process of submitting your application. This is something to be especially mindful of if you are submitting your application very close to the deadline for your country, because it may be the case that you submit your application with the fee waiver request before the deadline, but by the time USCIS denies the fee waiver and returns the application to you for you to resubmit it, by that point, the deadline has already passed, and then you would be submitting your application late. If you find yourself kind of in that position, we recommend kind of consulting an attorney to make a decision about whether to request a fee waiver. Okay, so the next step then is preparing Form I-821. Again, for Form I-821 is the actual application for TPS. Each of the forms that I've talked about has supplementary instructions. These instructions are on a separate PDF document that you can Google as well. And we at REEF, we really recommend that you use these instructions, especially if you are applying for TPS without an attorney. Attorneys are already familiar with these forms and how to fill them out. But if you're not an attorney, the supplementary instructions are going to be critical for you to make sure that you're filling out the form correctly. I've included a screenshot here of just one small part of the instructions for Form I-821. And what it demonstrates is that if you had Form I-821 pulled up and you had the instructions to Form I-821 pulled up next to it, and you were looking at them both together, you would see item 9 on the application, and it would ask you for your US Social Security number. And then you'll see item 9 on the instructions to provide your Social Security number, or if you do not have a Social Security number, many of you applying for TPS will not have a Social Security number, then you need to write or print N/A. This stands for not applicable. And you need to write this if you don't list your Social Security number. Using number 10 as another example, you're going to be asked throughout the application to provide dates. And that date needs to be listed in a very specific format. I emphasize these small kind of technical details in how you fill out this form, because if you don't follow these technical steps, then when USCIS is reviewing your application, they may send it back to you because it's not filled out the way they have instructed that the form be filled out. So these small details really do matter, and not getting them right can slow down your application process, because USCIS is going to send it back to you, your application, for you to fix it, and then you'll have to send it back to them, and that will take time. So these supplementary instructions are an absolute resource for you. It's a really long document. It can be an intimidating document, but if you just work through it step by step, it's got so much useful information that's really going to help you prepare your application. Okay, so you've prepared your form, you've filled out the form, and now you have to collect some supporting documents that are going to accompany your form. For TPS applications, there are 3 categories of supporting documents that you will need to provide. The first is proof of identity and nationality. The second is proof of entry into the United States. And then the third is proof of continued residence in the United States since the date required on your country's TPS announcement. For Ukraine, that date is March 1st of this year. And for Afghanistan, that date is March 15th. 2 things to note before we get into talking about the details of which documents you can provide for each of these categories. All documents, you're going to submit copies, not the original document, but copies. And this is another one of those steps that will take time. And these are things you can do before the application for your country is even released, so that you can get a head start. The second thing to note is that all documents must have English translations. There is not an English translation on the document itself. You are going to have to provide a translation of the document. This is another step that can take time to prepare. So moving into exactly what documents you're going to need to be collecting. For proof of identity, you can provide a passport. This is the best option. If you have one available, it's the easiest. It's just, the easiest, best option to submit. But if you do not have a passport available to you, you have other options as well. You can provide your birth certificate accompanied with a photo identification. Or you can provide an ID document from your country that shows your photo or has fingerprint on it. If you cannot provide any of these 3 documents, these are considered kind of primary documents to prove your identity and nationality. Then there are other documents you can provide. Those are considered secondary documents. It may be that you have to provide a combination of 2 or 3 of those documents in order to meet the threshold of proof. All of this information is laid out in the instructions to Form I-821. So to emphasize once more, those instructions are going to be so useful for you to systematically work through each thing you need to provide for the application. The second category of supporting documents provides proof of entry into the United States. So this is going to show that you entered the United States before the date required by your country's TPS application. You can provide either a passport page with an entry stamp on it, or Form I-94. This is a form that is generated when you enter the United States through a port of entry. It is a document that you can pull up on the internet. There's a search database. The link here will take you to that search database. You'll put in your name, your date of birth, your passport number, and the date you entered the United States, and the search engine will find your Form I-94 for you. Then you can download that and you can attach that to your application as proof of the date of entry into the United States. If you don't have one of these first two forms of proof, these are the best forms if they're available to you, then you can also use other documents to show that you began residing in the United States before March 1st. Again, these would kind of get into the realm of secondary documents, and those are listed very clearly in the instructions to Form I-821. The final category are documents that will prove your residence in the United States since the required entry date for your country. These could include employment records, pay stubs, W-2s, rent receipts, utility bills. These first three may be more difficult for some of you to provide, especially if you've recently arrived in the United States. If you are not work authorized, you will not have employment records. It may be that you are not formally renting the place you're living. You're staying with family, friends. You may not have utility bills that are under your name. This is totally okay and to be expected. Other records you can provide are school records if you're here as a student, hospital or medical records if you've sought medical attention since you've been in the country. And this last one I think will be most useful to those of you who are having a hard time pulling together these documents, are attestations from community organizations that you're a part of. These are letters from officials at these community organizations that say, I know this person and I know they've been in the United States since whatever date you arrived. Examples of community organizations are nonprofit organizations you're connected to, religious institutions you're connected to, and many other organizations. Essentially, any formal organization that has an official at its head who can write a letter from their official position saying that they have known you and known that you've been in the U.S. Since the date required on your required for your country for your TPS application. A note on the use of letters to show proof of residence, whether this is a letter from your landlord, a letter from your employer, a letter from a community organization. These letters need to have certain information and they need to be notarized. You can find the information that needs to be in each letter listed in the instructions to Form I-821. And then the step of notarizing a letter is just another thing that's one of these added steps that takes time. And is something you can begin preparing now, even while you're waiting for the application date for your country to be available. Finally, in the course of putting together your Form I-821, you may come across some circumstances that require added consideration. And in these cases, at REEF, we recommend that you consult a lawyer while you're preparing your TPS application. The first is if you have been arrested, charged, or convicted with a criminal offense anywhere in the world, including in the United States, you will be required to disclose that and to provide some additional documents related to that. One thing to note, some of you may be coming from a circumstance where you were arrested unfairly. Your arrest was illegitimate. It was politically motivated. However, if there is an official record of your arrest in a country, that still needs to be recorded on your application. This is a case where we really recommend talking to an attorney just to make sure that you're including the right information depending on your individual situation. disclosing an arrest or a conviction is not automatically going to mean that your TPS application is denied. However, not including an arrest or conviction, omitting it from your application, can count as lying on your application, and that is a reason that your application could be denied, and that could have consequences beyond your application. So it's critically important that you are disclosing arrests and convictions. If you have any questions about your specific situation, we recommend consulting an attorney. The second consideration that may come up for you is if you do not have access to a required official record. And for some, this may be, common if you aren't in a situation where you have access to all of your personal records. If you need to request a record from your government and your country of origin government, and your government is not able to issue that record. In the instructions to Form I-821, USCIS explains everything you need to submit if you can't provide the official record. However, this is another case where we recommend consulting with an attorney to make sure that you're following these steps correctly and providing all the best documentation possible in place of the official record. Okay, so you've prepared your Form I-821. You've prepared all your supporting documents, and you're ready to move forward. What happens next? The TPS application at some point, and the date for the application for your country at some point in the coming weeks or month will be released, and then it's time to submit your application. One note, it's listed in blue here. Do not submit your application before the date for your country is released. It does benefit you to submit your application as soon as possible once the date is released. However, it does not benefit you to submit it sooner. And if you do submit it sooner, USCIS will just send it back to you, and it may in fact create delays in processing your application down the road. So do not submit your application before the date for your country is released. Forms I-821 and I-765. 765 is the application for employment authorization. These forms you can file online. USCIS recommends that applicants use the online portal to submit their applications if they can. It streamlines the process. Right now, if you're considering applying for TPS, you can go to the USCIS online portal. You can make yourself a user account and get everything set up. You can go to start an application, start my TPS application, and then it's going to bring you to a menu where you're going to have to list what your country of origin is. If you get to that step right now, you will not see Ukraine or Afghanistan listed there yet because those application dates have not been released yet. Those countries will only become available in the drop-down menu that allows you to advance further in the application once the application date has been announced. If you are requesting a fee waiver, Form I-812, the request for a fee waiver, is one of the forms that is not yet available through the online portal. So if you're requesting a fee waiver, you are going to have to submit your entire application by mail. If you do submit your application by mail, you'll write a cover letter for your application package. I have a bit more information about what needs to be on that cover letter coming on the next slide. The last thing to know is that information about where you're going to mail your application package will become available once the date for your country is announced. Every country that has TPS right now, those applications go to different USCIS processing facilities around the country. So we don't know yet where the TPS applications for Ukraine or Afghanistan will go, which mailing address they'll go to. They may or may not go to the same mailing address, for example. All that information is going to be available once the application date is released. So you'll have to wait for that final piece of information. If you are submitting your application by mail, you're going to want to prepare a cover letter that you're going to include at the front of your application. And the goal of this cover letter is, you're going to have all your forms, you're going to have all your supporting documents, You want to make it as easy as possible for the person who's reviewing your application to make sure that everything that needs to be there is included. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to just quickly look through everything and say, okay, yes, this has all the pieces it needs for us to move forward. We're going to issue you a receipt for it so that we can begin making a decision about approving it. That cover letter is going to include some information that identifies who you are, your name, your country of origin, your passport number, your date of birth. Next, it's going to include a list of what forms and documents are included in your package in the order that they appear. Think of this list as a table of contents that explains what's in the package that the person is looking at. And then finally, if you're submitting a fee waiver request, you're going to indicate that. And you're also going to explain which of the 3 official justifications you're basing your fee waiver request on. So you may include a sentence that to the effect of, this application includes a form to request a fee waiver. Form to request a fee waiver because I currently earn below 150% of the federal poverty guideline, and I experienced a medical emergency on this date that means I am unable to afford to make payment for this application. So you're going to state really clearly what the justification for your fee waiver request is. Okay, so you've prepared your application and you waited for USCIS to announce the application date for your country. USCIS announced the application date and you submitted your application. And now what can you expect next? The first question we often get is processing times for backing up one step. What to expect? What are the steps that are going to happen after you submit your application? If you file your application online, you will immediately receive a notification that your application has been submitted. If you file by mail, but you include a request for e-notification, this was one of those forms that allows USCIS to send you text messages and emails about your application. If you included this form and you requested to receive information by text message or email, you will receive a notification that your application has been received about a week after you submit it. One thing to note is this immediate notification that, okay, your application has been submitted, that notification is different from a receipt notice. A receipt notice is the first official kind of record that's going to come later. The receipt notice means that USCIS has received your application. They've looked through it. It has all the pieces it needs to have. It has payment, everything was filled out correctly. It has all the required supporting documents. And so they can now officially begin processing it to make a decision about approving or denying the application. And once they kind of ensure that it has all the necessary pieces to continue with processing it, that is when USCIS will issue your receipt notice. Your receipt notice is going to have your receipt number on it. Your receipt number is critical because this is the number that is going to allow you to look up your application on the online portal to see if there's any status updates. And it's also, if you call USCIS and ask them for an update, you're going to be asked to provide this number to the person who you're speaking with on the phone. One thing to note is that it can take 3 to 9 even weeks to receive your receipt notice. USCIS has said that after 3 weeks, if you haven't received your receipt notice, you can call. I've listed the number here. You can call and speak to a representative to check on the status of your application. However, we don't necessarily recommend calling before 3 weeks because if you do call before 3 weeks, it may be that when you're speaking to somebody on the phone, they're going to say to you, hey, wait until the 3 week mark and then call us back. So USCIS has been very kind of systematic about at what point can you ask for updates about your application. The next thing that you may receive is an appointment notice. This will be an appointment, a notice for an appointment to get your biometrics captured, your fingerprints. If you have not had your fingerprints captured for another kind of immigration application and you are over a certain age, you will be required to have your biometrics captured. The appointment notice is going to include a date for your appointment and a location for your appointment based on where your residence is. If you fail to appear for your biometrics appointment, your TPS application may be denied on the grounds that you've kind of abandoned your application. You didn't show up for this next step in the process. If you receive your appointment notice and the date and time of your appointment does not work for you, you do have the option of rescheduling. The appointment notice will include instructions about how to reschedule your appointment. However, we recommend wherever possible, whenever possible, even if it means rescheduling other things going on in your life, try to just attend the appointment notice that's on the initial, or the appointment that's on the initial appointment notice. Rescheduling can slow down processing your TPS application. However, if you have a conflict that you absolutely can't work around, it's okay to reschedule your biometrics appointment. Finally, if you do reschedule your biometrics appointment, just make sure that you do that ahead of the date, so that it doesn't look like accidentally you just didn't show up for your biometrics appointment. The next thing that some may receive, not everyone will receive these, but some of you may, is a request for evidence or a notice of intent to deny. And especially this second notice of intent to deny sounds very concerning. Essentially what it means is that USCIS has determined that in order to make a decision for your application, they need more information from you. And it may be that they need more information about your background. They might need a different supporting document. The request that they send you is going to include exactly what they need in order to finish processing your application. The most critical thing here is that you respond right away. Don't let this sit, because if they don't receive a response from you, they may just deny the application because they won't have all the information they said they needed. If you receive this request for more evidence and they're asking for something that you don't know how to provide, you're not able to provide, this is another instance where you're going to want to consult an attorney, because an attorney is going to be able to help you navigate that unusual circumstance. And then the final step in your TPS application process will be an approval notice or a letter indicating that your TPS application has been denied. And that letter is also going to include a reason for your denial, as well as instructions about how to appeal the denial. So even if you are denied TPS with your initial application, that's not the end of the process. You will have the opportunity to go back and appeal the denial, based on the reason they provided for your denial. So processing times, this is a question we get often. How long is it going to take for my TPS application to be approved? And the short answer is we don't know. It really varies. Each country that has TPS right now, applications for that country they go to different USCIS processing facilities. And each USCIS processing facility has a different level volume of cases they're dealing with. Some have a shorter queue of cases, some have a longer queue of cases. All of these factors affect how quickly your TPS application will be reviewed. Right now, the processing time for other countries with TPS varies from 3 months to 13 and a half months, a little more than a year. So you can see that's a huge spread of time. We can't yet say what the processing times for Ukraine and Afghanistan are going to be. But what you can do once the application for your country is released, you can check the average processing time by going to this link listed here. And it's going to say, applications for TPS for Afghanistan that are being processed at this facility are taking on average this long to review. And that will give you some sense of how long you're going to have to wait to receive a response. The last thing to know is that if you are submitting your application close to the deadline for your country's application period, It may be that you receive your approval notice after the application period has already closed, meaning the deadline has already passed. If people are submitting at this point, they're submitting their application late, but you still haven't received your approval notice yet, even though you submitted your application. Your approval notice may come after that deadline has passed. And I include that just so that you have it in your mind that this is a possible outcome, and it's absolutely okay. If your approval notice comes after the application period for your country has already closed. Finally, what to expect if you submitted a work permit application along with your TPS application. If you submitted your TPS application, your work permit application together, then USCIS will review your work permit application before they make a decision about your TPS application. Essentially, they're going to look at your TPS application. They're going to say, okay, everything looks good here. All the information that we need is here. You know, we need to do a little bit more before we approve this TPS application. But in the meantime, we're going to send a work permit. This is the benefit of applying for your work permit with your TPS application, is that it can speed up the process of receiving your application. However, it's not required. If you choose to submit your work permit application after you've already submitted your TPS application, that's absolutely okay. And again, to reiterate, if you already have employment authorization through a different immigration status you have, that employment authorization will continue to be valid for as long as it says it's valid. You know, your TPS application won't change the validity of your pre-existing work authorization. A note on this front, though, is that you may receive your work permit before your TPS approval. However, this is not guaranteed. So while that's a best case scenario, it may also be the outcome that your work permit comes with your TPS approval. That, again, it's really hard to say whether that would happen to your application. It just depends on the processing time and volume of applications at the facility that's reviewing the TPS applications for your specific country. That wraps up the information that we're sharing in this video, but always please check out our website, www.reefnyc.org, for more resources about TPS, for an overview of TPS, for information about other legal options that aren't TPS for Ukrainians and Afghans. I will put some links to key resources in the description to this video. We hope you found it helpful, and hope to stay in touch in the future.